I'm Scarlett Wilson. I am the solicitor for the Ninth Circuit, which is Charleston and Berkeley counties, and I am honored to be here today for my friend David Pascoe. 34 years ago, Solicitor Pascoe and I met in the basement of a building in Columbia where we were law clerks for a renowned prosecutor, Bart. He sent us to the basement to do work, to do research, and that's where we both really fell in love with prosecution. We had a front row seat to an investigation and trials regarding Operation Lost Trust. And it was really there that both Solicitor Pascoe and I fell in love with this job. And we were so lucky to be such youngsters at the time, watching some of the best prosecutors in the state try to take out corruption in Columbia under the leadership of Bart. It has been a long road since then. You know, I became a prosecutor immediately after clerking for a judge. About that time, Solicitor Pascoe was finishing law school. I got a job with the solicitor's office. Pascoe was in private practice and he was miserable. Absolutely miserable. It was not where he needed to be. It wasn't where he wanted to be. There weren't any slots. And fortunately or unfortunately, a friend of ours, and I've said this before, I hated to dance on his grave, but he failed the bar. And I got on the horn to Solicitor Pascoe and said, you've got to get over here. You've got to join us in the solicitor's office prosecuting cases. And he didn't think twice about it. He joined up, and for the next 30 years, he has thought like a prosecutor, and he has fought like a prosecutor. And that's the reason I'm here today. It is refreshing to have a candidate like Solicitor Pascoe, because he's not using the office of Attorney General to get somewhere else. That's so important for you to know about him, just like he wasn't using the office of solicitor to get somewhere else. People have been talking to Solicitor Pascoe for years about running for Attorney General. I think he even opened an account at one time, but his heart wasn't in it. He didn't really see the need at that time to do it. And he wasn't going to do something halfway and something that he couldn't really invest himself in. And so he was great being solicitor and is a great solicitor. And his career could have just ended that way and he would have been perfectly satisfied with that. But something changed. Something changed. And that was his involvement, his being tasked with handling the State House probe. And then, you know, some 30 years later, after we sat together and watched and worked on Operation Lost Trust, he was able to step up and take over the probe and make his best effort to crush corruption in Columbia. He knew that he would be maligned. He knew he would be attacked. He knew all of that. What he didn't know is that his authority would be clawed back and that he would have to leave that probe or conclude that probe knowing good and well there was so much more work to do, that he had so much more to uncover, so much more to prosecute. And so the idea of Attorney General began to percolate for real in his mind. And, you know, I was lucky to be a part of working on that probe with Solicitor Pascoe, along with Solicitor Stone and Brackett. He knew that he was going to need help, and again, we stepped up with him. And I keep using the term step up because it's important for you to know he didn't have to take on the probe. In fact, others were asked to conduct the probe, and others said no. Solicitor Pascoe knew it was his calling and knew it was the right thing to do, and he stepped in and he did a magnificent job with the probe. After it was over, however, after his authority was pulled back and he was limited on what he could do, he became the tip of the spear talking about judicial reform, talking about the things that he had seen in the probe, talking about things that we had shared with him from our circuits, including right here in Berkeley County, shenanigans that were going on with judicial elections, with judges who had been elected. And Solicitor Pascoe led the way, with us right beside him and right behind him, pushing for judicial reform because of all that he had seen with the probe and in our circuits. And he did something that no one had ever done before. He went around this state from group to group. It didn't matter if it were Democrat. It didn't matter if it were Republican. He wanted to educate anybody who was willing to listen about what was going on with our judicial selection and with the judges who were on the bench. He did something very unusual. He didn't talk in platitudes. He named names. That took guts. And those are the kind of guts that we need in our Attorney General. And that's what we have in David Pascoe. A prosecutor cannot be driven by partisanship. And it makes it hard to run for an office, to be a prosecutor, knowing that you have to make decisions despite political ramifications. And so while it is a political election, I know that Solicitor Pascoe, Attorney General Pascoe, will not let politics drive his office. And that also will be refreshing. I've told you before, when you decided to come home to the Republican Party, that I expected you, and I challenge you to remember what all those R's stand for. Because yes, they do stand for Republican. And he was a member of the Republican Club at the Citadel. He was hired by the Republican U.S. Attorney to help with lost trust as a law clerk. But that R stands for a lot more. And I challenge you to remember that as you move forward as a candidate and as our Attorney General. You have to be reliable like you have always been to the people of South Carolina. You have to be respectful and reverent like you have always been to our Constitution. Don't become part of the circus. You and I have seen firsthand, and continue to see it up until this day, how politicians want to make our justice system a part of a clown show. Don't join into that. Be reasonable and rational, but relentless. Relentless like you have been for the Smalls family. Relentless like you have been in exposing the judiciary, exposing the selection process. And what people need to understand is it's not just reform. Yes, certainly Solicitor Pascoe, Attorney General Pascoe will be about reform. But judicial reform really is about giving independence back to our judges, letting them do their jobs and make rulings on the things that they know that they should. They support reform. They want their independence back. You've already started the work. I know that you'll finish it. Finally, as we've discussed before and as you will see, you have to be resilient because they are going to continue coming after you. When Solicitor Pascoe left the probe, he wasn't finished. He was just getting started. And that's what this campaign is about. He's getting started. But that means the swamp monsters are just getting started too. So buckle up. I have no doubt that Solicitor Pascoe has what it takes to be our Attorney General. I have no doubt that he will run the office without regard to political ramifications. And how do I know that? He's shown us. It's not about what he tells us. It's not about the speeches and presentations that he gives. It's about the work that he does. He has shown us that he can do the job, that he can stand up to the Columbia cabal, that he will continue to be the tip of the spear in slaying the swamp monsters in Columbia, regardless of their political stripes. We need Attorney General David Pascoe to crush the corruption in Columbia. We need him to finish the job.
Thank you, Scarlett. Before I start, I just would be remiss if I came all the way to Charleston and did not tell her constituents what a remarkable lady you have in Scarlett Wilson as your solicitor. She is smart, tough, hardworking. She knows the difference between a bad guy and a guy having a bad day. And when her cause is righteous, she will draw her sword and slay dragons if she has to. So, yeah, I know Pasco. Yeah. Pasco, he's good. He's good. He's fine. He's good. But Scarlett, let me just tell you, no. When David asked me to come up here and say a few words on his behalf, I said 2 to 3 minutes. How am I going to manage that? But 2 to 3 hours, the room would be empty, the lights would be off. So I've got to summarize in just a few minutes what I think of this man and why I'm here. But there were 2 problems that occurred to me. First of all, 2 to 3 minutes is not long enough. And secondly, nobody here knows me. I'm like from the upstate. I'm York and Union counties. It's like, what are they going to think? How do they think I know anything about this guy? Well, let me tell you, I've known about him since before I was solicitor in 2006. I met David when I was the deputy solicitor under my predecessor, Tommy Pope, and I have always had a tremendous amount of respect for not only his intellect, but his ability in court. His reputation in court was preceded itself and reached all the way up to York. People knew who he was even before he was solicitor. After I became solicitor, I got to know him better. I knew him as a respected leader in our group in a very short period of time. I think he came to office in 2004. He took office in 2005. He became a respected leader. People looked up to him, asked him for advice. When they had a thorny question or a difficult case, they needed help. David Pascoe was the first call they made, and I'm one of those people. So as time went on, 5, 6, 7 years in, I became aware of his efforts in the state corruption probe. And as Scarlett mentioned, I was involved in that. I had a minor role, but my minor role afforded me a front row seat to witness the work that he did and what a view I had. Let me tell you something about David Pascoe. You see him in the courtroom like I did. You see him standing at this podium. You may see him on television talking about things. I see him in the back room. I see him over lunch. I see him in places y'all aren't privy to. And that man in those places is just the same guy that you see when you see him in the courtroom. When he says he believes that corruption is wrong and needs to be stamped out, it's not just some words from a politician. I wouldn't be here if I thought that for a second. He says it because he believes it. This is who he is. He can't change that any more than a tiger can change his stripes. David Pascoe is a man of principle. He's a man of courage. And it was a privilege to work with him on the corruption probe. Again, albeit a minor role. After the corruption probe, it sort of led in. I came to this from a different route. I had my own problems there, which led me to the same conclusion that he reached because he saw what was happening to these legislator lawyers that he was trying to get in the corruption probe. And we both realized that the bigger problem we were facing, or at least as big, was the fact that the judges and the courts that are required to sit in judgment in these cases are presided over by people that are picked by the legislature, paid for by the legislature, and if they don't like the work they're doing, they can kick them to the curb. And it happens. You saw those pictures up on the wall. Tommy Russo, Christy Harrington, gone. Stephen John, gone. If they don't like what you do, they kick you out. Now, if you're a lawyer legislator and you're appearing in front of a judge that you pick, you pay, and you can fire, do you think that you're going to get the same treatment as Scarlett, Duffy, David, or I when we're standing up there on behalf of some victim or some other private lawyers on the other side? Are they going to get the same treatment? They can't help it. These are good people. The judges, just like David said a while ago, they're good people, but they can't help but realize and know at some level that the person on one side of the courtroom has a say over their job and can fire them if they don't like what they do. And that's wrong. Our judges need to be independent. And I walked this state with David Pascoe, traveling from one end to the other, fighting to get the message out to GOP groups all over the state. More than that, when the legislature foolishly invited David and I to come speak before a committee set up for the purpose of determining whether or not judicial selection was fair or not, David and I were like, we're all in, absolutely. We went down there, we made our presentation over 2 days. The first day, we laid out our case. They asked us a couple of questions, but then they stopped the proceedings and said, well, we're going to reschedule this for another day. And they called us back about a month later, and they didn't ask us a single question. We sat there mute, and when somebody tried to ask us a question, they were cut off. Oh, no, no, no. Remember, we're not asking them any questions. Do you know why they wouldn't want to ask David or I any questions? Because we had answers they didn't want to hear. There was no good response to what we were saying. So they just stood there and speechified for a little while and then dismissed us. That fight's not over. We need David Pascoe in the Attorney General's office to carry the fight forward, to make sure that all our courts are presided over by people who do not live in fear of their legislative overlords. We need to make sure that the separation of powers that is the foundation of our republic is honored, that there are 3 separate co-equal branches of government, and the governor suffers from some of the same problems. 3 separate co-equal branches of government, each with its own sphere of influence, and each independent of the other. So I ask you, I know this man, I know his heart, I know what he will do for us if we honor him with our votes, and I'm asking you to do that. Thank you.
I am Duffy Stone. I'm the solicitor for the 14th Circuit. Once you get out of Scarlett's jurisdiction, I've got everything from there to Georgia. And it's funny because David, about several months ago, I guess, called me 6-8 months ago now and said, I need you to come to Dorchester County for me. And I said, why? And he said, because I'm addressing the Republican club there, and I'm going to announce that I am, in fact, a Republican. And I said, David, I'm shocked. And he said, what do you mean you're shocked? I said, I can't believe it. And he said, what? I said, I thought you already were a Republican. I didn't know. And I say that somewhat jokingly, but the other end of that is really the reason that I'm here. It's also the reason that Scarlett Wilson's here, and it's the reason that Kevin Brackett's here. We are career prosecutors. I'm here because I have known David Pascoe for decades. And I've worked with him, I have prosecuted with him, I have sought his advice, I've given him advice, I don't know that he's ever taken it, but I've given it. And we've worked together on issues state and national, together to make South Carolina a safer place. And what we need in the Attorney General's office is just that. We need a career prosecutor. We need somebody who stands above politics, who is a prosecutor at heart. And it's interesting that I sit here and I listened to Scarlett a few minutes ago, and it's interesting because she told you half of what I was going to say, which is this. I went to law school to be a prosecutor. And when I was in law school, I clerked for the solicitor's office. I worked in that office. And after a short term with a judge, when I graduated, I went straight back to the solicitor's office in Columbia. And during that time, I learned a great deal. I learned a great deal for what was going on inside our office and what was going on outside of our office. And I've never told Bart Daniel this, but I learned a great deal about what a good prosecutor can do in changing attitudes. I remember specifically being in a prosecutor's office in Columbia and watching Bart Daniel lead the investigation against 17 legislators who sold their votes. And when they sold their votes, they didn't just sell their votes. They sold the people's trust. It was called lost trust for a reason. And I watched that. And I saw it as a young prosecutor in the state prosecutor's office, and I watched the federal government come after those legislators, and I saw a change. I saw not only a change in laws that were passed, but also in attitudes. I saw what a great prosecutor could do. And I saw it also in my own office. I'm watching people in my office stand up for victims, for sometimes agreeing with the victim and sometimes not agreeing with the judge or not agreeing with the defense attorney, but they stood up anyway, because that's what prosecutors do. Prosecutors try to make it better. We try to bring truth, we try to bring justice to situations in which people have lived through the worst trauma of their lives. And this is what David Pascoe does every single day he goes into his office. The part you've seen is the corruption probe. The part we see every day is what he does when he's not on the front page of the newspaper or on television. And it's all the same. It's about being a professional prosecutor. I'm here today for the same reason Scarlett's here, for the same reason that Kevin is here. We are people who went to law school to be prosecutors, who have made our career as prosecutors. And we recognize that every day we have to look evil in the eye and say no more. We have to look corruption in the eye and say no more. And because of the examples of people like Bart Daniel and Scarlett and Kevin, and most importantly David, we know that that makes a difference. We know that that makes our state better. We know it makes it safer. We know it makes our system credible. And that's why we're here today. That's what the Attorney General's office needs. It needs somebody courageous enough to do what's right and intelligent enough to know how to do it. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is David Pascoe. David, thank you for stepping forward. Thank you for taking on this responsibility, and we're behind you, as we always have been.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to listen to these great prosecutors speak. I had the pleasure of, I was lucky enough to be able to hire Scarlett and to be able to hire David Pascoe and to watch and follow their careers. It's been mighty impressive, both of them. When I first became U.S. Attorney, I was appointed by the first President Bush, George H.W. Walker Bush. But I was appointed, I took the office in May, and shortly after that, I got a call from a young guy, fresh out of the Citadel, who said he was practically begging for a job. He said he was paying his way through law school, and he wanted to be a career prosecutor, and he could think of no better place to work than the U.S. Attorney's office. Well, I had paid my way through the Citadel and paid my way through law school, and so I said, there's a soft spot in my heart for this guy already. I don't even know him. And then I did hire David right there on the spot over the telephone. David stayed with the office. I promised him. I said, David, let me tell you something now. You'll be running, it's not a glamorous job. You'll be running errands, making copies, and making coffee every now and then. But in between, if you look and you learn and you listen, you just might learn something. And he did just that. He stayed with the office for 3 years till he graduated and took the bar, and then successfully, as Scarlett told you, I had a brief stint in private practice and went to prosecute criminals. But this was done at the time that I was U.S. Attorney, as Scarlett mentioned, that we were undergoing Operation Lost Trust, which became at the time the largest legislative public corruption case in the country, and it's still one of the tops. So David saw how these cases were built, how these cases were prosecuted, and how the courage it took to bring people to sentencing and to have justice delivered. These people were the highest levels of state government. And I knew the pressure. David would later find out that pressure. But David was right there in the thick of it. And in between running errands and making coffee, evidently he learned a little bit. That experience, just as it did with Scarlett, lit a fire in David. He developed a passion for prosecuting crimes, and in particular, for prosecuting public corruption. Decades later, that same passion led him to lead another State House probe some 30 years later. And so I ended up prosecuting some of the most powerful politicians in this state. So almost 30 years ago from that day that David called me, I called him. I told him, I said, David, I just want to let you know how proud I am now the job you've done. Because I know how hard it is. I know the pressure when you prosecute powerful politicians. And I know you've got to have courage. And sometimes you're all alone. But you've got to stand there. And you've got to take it. And you've got to see it through to the end. And that's what David has done. I know David Pascoe. I know his heart. I know his courage, his integrity, and his skill in the courtroom. I'm glad he wants to remain in prosecution and in public service because we need someone like David Pascoe. We need a fearless prosecutor as our Attorney General. David knows how to finish what he starts. He's not a talker. He's a doer. He's a man of action. If you want a prosecutor who won't back down, who will stay the course with a steady hand, you want an AG who will fight what's right, then you want David Pascoe for Attorney General. Please join me in welcoming David.
Wow. Thank you. To live up to those kind words that they said. And it's not just what they said, but it's who said it. The United States Attorney that gave me my start in public service 35 years ago and demonstrated the courage it takes to take on corrupt legislators up at the General Assembly. And without a doubt, the three best, most fearless solicitors in this state, present company excluded, no, seriously, the best solicitors in this state, who helped me tremendously during the corruption probe. Solicitor Brackett, Kevin was being very humble when he said he had a small role. They all played, and especially Solicitor Brackett, a tremendous role in that. The probe would not have gone forward without them. I can say that without hesitation. My name is David Pascoe, and most people know me from leading the South Carolina State House corruption probe that convicted and removed from office the most powerful men in the legislature. They were unethical. They were corrupt. We took down a political kingdom who forgot what public service means. They put themselves before the families of South Carolina, and they needed to be stopped. And I stopped them. We all know, though, that corruption still runs deep in South Carolina, especially in Columbia. And when I tried to go further, the Supreme Court told me I had to stop. They told me I had to stop because they said I wasn't the Attorney General. Well, this morning, I'm going to do something about that. Today, I announce that I'm running to become South Carolina's next Attorney General. I am going to go back to Columbia, and I'm going to finish the job I started. But that's not the only reason that I'm running for Attorney General. I believe our state is at a crossroads. We can keep going down the path of rising crime, unchecked corruption, and weak leadership, or we can fight back, and I'm going to fight back. I've been a prosecutor for over 3 decades. I've tried the hardest cases. I've stood face to face with killers, and I've looked grieving families in the eye, and I told them I would deliver justice, and I did deliver. I've not only sent men to death row, I've sent them to their executioner. The last person executed by the firing squad, Michael Motti, I was the one who stood up in a courtroom and argued for justice for what he had done.
I was the first public official in South Carolina to call for the firing squad, and that was back in 2018. And when I made that call, both the left and the right laughed at me and said I was crazy. But I fought for it, working with legislators on both sides of the aisle, and 5 years later it passed into law. Now it's in the books. Because when I say I'm going to work to get something done, I don't stop until we get it done. So I stand here today, not with just a record, but a vision for South Carolina. A vision to make South Carolina the safest, least corrupt state in America. And this is how I'm going to do it. First, I commit that AG will no longer stand for aspiring governor. I will never, thank you. I will never run for another office but for Attorney General. I have no interest in higher office. I have absolutely no interest at all, as you can tell, in making friends in Columbia. My sole interest will be cutting crime, protecting our children, protecting our state from federal overreach, and crushing corruption. Second, we are going to reduce violent crime by 50% in South Carolina. And that is not a talking point, that is a target. And look, I know we're not going to attain this goal on my first day in office, probably not even my first term. But we are always going to strive to do better. Because when we stop trying to be better, we stop being good. We are going to attack violent crime like it's war, because it is. We're going to work with law enforcement at every level, invest in technology that actually solves crimes, and go after repeat violent offenders. Because if you commit a violent crime in South Carolina, I want you to hear loud and clear that we're coming after you. We're coming after you. Third, we are going to do more to protect our children. We are going to do a better job of protecting our children than we have in the past, and that is on all of us. I am fighting for a bill that raises the age of homicide by child abuse for victims from 10 to 17 years old, and that is a fight that Solicitor Duffy is leading. He is fighting that. He's been fighting that cause for years. But we can't get it passed because the bill is stuck in committee, like so many other great bills, because it's being blocked by loyal legislators that care more about their paychecks than they do children. It's disgusting, and it's wrong. The same loyal legislators, by the way, who watered down the fentanyl-induced homicide bill to where it's basically useless. So yes, I will also be fighting for a real fentanyl-induced homicide bill, and I will be calling out those loyal legislators in the coming months, and I will call them out when I'm your Attorney General. Any loyal legislator that fights pro-child legislation. Let me repeat, I'm not running to be your Attorney General to make friends. I'm running to work for the people of the state. We are also going to drastically increase the conviction rate of child pornography cases, and we're going to get more prison time for those criminals. We're going to seek passage of legislation that makes child trafficking a death penalty offense, and very importantly, we are going to reinstitute state programs for children that will steer them away from a path of crime, the Youth Mentor Program. I'm going to send the message out that if you harm a child, the full weight of justice will come down on you like a hammer. And finally, you cannot pick at corruption. You have to crush it. I firmly believe that the most important job for any Attorney General is to be where corruption needs an adversary. And that is where you're going to find David Pascoe. That is exactly where I'm going to be. I've seen how the system works in Columbia. I had a first-hand view of the rat's nest up there, and I know how to eradicate it. Thanks in large part to the 3 solicitors here today who assisted me in the State House corruption probe, we're able to remove powerful elements in Columbia. But there's still a lot of work to be done, and I'm taking action to get back to Columbia to finish the job I started. I am going to make it impossible for lawyer legislators, for that matter, I'm going to make it impossible for any legislator to profit from their position. No longer will they be allowed to profit from the positions of power that they hold. And this lawyer legislator uniparty that runs the state house, that is immoral, it is unethical, it's hurting South Carolina businesses and working class families all over South Carolina. And we're going to put an end to it. Because here's the truth. Country club lobbyists and legislators, they don't fear other politicians. They fear prosecutors. Prosecutors who can walk into a courtroom with evidence of corruption, like Bart Daniel, like these 3 solicitors, and walk out with convictions. That's what they fear. South Carolina deserves an attorney general who knows how to fight, who isn't afraid to take on the most powerful men and women in this state. I'm not afraid of anyone, and I'm not going to back down from anyone. This campaign is not about politics. It's about truth. It's about justice. It's about doing what's right, no matter what the cost. If you believe that South Carolina deserves safer streets, cleaner government, and a justice system that works for the people of this state, then I ask for your vote. Let's make South Carolina the safest, least corrupt state in America. Let's get to work. Thank you very much. Thank you.